Hello, welcome to another Towle Talks. Today we start programming in PHP. Everyone should have XAMPP installed by now, or LAMP if you're using Linux. Hopefully you've had a little time to play around with PHP and practice, or at least read up on the language. Again, I'm going to have a very quick overview of PHP, but I'm not going to do a very heavy overview of it. Also, I'm going to start posting review questions at the end of the lectures. I will try to post those answers at the next lecture if possible. So today we're going to start talking about the PHP basics. Again, feel free to pause the video, practice, be actively involved, otherwise you may miss some of the concepts. So let's talk about PHP. How does PHP work? Well, PHP is going to be a server-side language that runs on the server. So here we have the client or the web browser is going to call the PHP file via the URL. So you're literally going to type this in the URL. The web server is going to receive it as a request. Instead of just shuffling the file back to the browser like you would normally handle a web page, it's going to run the PHP script on the web server itself. The output of the PHP script is going to be then sent to an HTML script. This is one major difference. Sorry, my mouse on the wrong screen. This is one major difference between the scripting or writing code for a console or a standalone application and web development. Is web development, you're almost always writing out to an HTML script. We'll talk about what the consequences of this a little bit later. But just remember that PHP is outputting to an HTML script, not a console. The most common mistake that happens is if I want a new line, I write out /n and then nothing happens because /n is ignored in HTML. If I want a new line, I have to write out a break, literally an HTML break, to get a new line on the HTML script. Once the HTML script is created, it then gets sent back to the client or the web browser, and then the web browser can see the HTML script. From the client and web browser's perspective, this step has never happened. As far as this browser is concerned, this HTML script exists this way. It was handwritten, and that's what it got. It does not see that the PHP script is dynamically writing to the HTML script, so that your PHP code is dynamically writing your web page. Now, the reason we want to do this is because the script is running on the web server. The script running on the web server means that it's secure. It's over here, or relatively secure, I should say. It's protected. At least it's running on your code. The client cannot see it. You wouldn't want the client to see your passwords, your database tables, or whatever, so the client can't see any of that because it's running over here. We can't have it running on the client side, such as JavaScript, because it's not secure. So let's talk about PHP. First of all, we have variables. Like all programming languages, variables are soft type, therefore we don't have to worry about specifying what type they are. None of the int, float, or objects, or new. We just specify a variable, set it to a value, and go on. This does hurt us in performance, but it usually goes unnoticed. So it's dynamically typecast, therefore it is going to be slower than, say, something like C or even Java. All variables in PHP must start with a $sign. Probably the most unusual and the most unique feature of PHP syntax is this rule here. After the $sign, all variables must start with a letter, just like Java and C++. After that initial letter, they can contain numbers. They can also contain underscores. PHP, the variable, is case sensitive, and there is no declaration. Once you start using the variable, it is in scope. You can see it. So as soon as I say $x equals 10, I can now use X. I can assign it something. I can print it out. So as soon as I initialize the variable or set it to something, I have it declared. There is scope in PHP. There is a global scope, which means there's no class or no functions. It's just code written in line with HTML. There's class scope, where the variables are declared inside the class. And then there's function scope or local scope, where you've declared a local variable inside a function of a PHP script, and that will only exist inside that particular function. So today, yesterday we talked about installing XAMPP and how to get the server running. Now we're going to go back to that window we created from the last movie. And remember, I installed it under C XAMPP. So here I have my little XAMPP folder. And then we're going to go inside our HT docs. Again, we're not going to worry about all this stuff right now. We're mainly going to be worried about inside HT docs. And here we're going to make a new folder. I already made one. I called it Lecture 1. And then we're going to just open this up and notice there's nothing inside here. So just to make sure I am on the right track here, we're going to open up our Notepad++ or whatever text editor you prefer. And I'm just going to do a real quick test. So we'll do hello world. We're going to save it, but this time we're going to save it as a PHP file. Now, it's true that all, I'd have to find PHP on this list if it even has it, that PHP file is actually just an HTML file. But, but it has to be PHP so the server knows to run the PHP before it hosts it. So here I'm going to Lecture 1, and we'll just call it test.php. So I don't actually have any PHP in this document right now. I'm just going to say hello world, a very boring font. But just to make sure it is going to work. So I open up my web browser. Now here I have a subdirectory, so I'm no longer in my root. If I was in the htdoc folder, I could just type it here. But I have a subdirectory, so I need to go to Lecture 1. And I believe I call it test.png, or oops, PHP. Also make sure our Apache is running. Our Apache is not running, so that's why it didn't work. Make sure we start our Apache. And make sure I have the right file name, which is Lecture 1 test.php. Okay. Hello world. So there we see it's working, although we're not running any PHP right now. So, and this is also how you get to a subdirectory. Now we go back here. It's good practice to have good HTML. You'll see that this is not always possible, and we'll talk about when this is not possible. But luckily for us, we're going to be using a NVC fairly soon, so it won't be a big deal. For now, we'll just use good HTML practice, at least get our basic HTML. And yes, I know I forgot my HTML up here. Alright, so first thing to remember about PHP is we are writing, it's going to be in line with HTML script. And so we have this bracket, this little tag here will open up PHP, and this will close the PHP. So now inside these two tags, I can write PHP. The server is going to run this PHP before it gives it to the client, and therefore the client should never see this code. This code should never be transferred. And we can use this code to dynamically change and modify our web page. Now remember, we are writing out to a web page, not a console. It's a very common mistake early on to think that we're writing out to a console. Up to now, most of the programming languages you've been doing have been with consoles, so it's very common for people to assume that this is going to be writing out to a console. Here's the problem. Let's say I want to just, and of course I wouldn't use PHP for this, but just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to use echo, and I'll say my blog on PHP. Obviously, I would not be doing PHP to make a blog, but let's say we are. Now let's say I want a new line. So I do /n thinking I'm writing to a console. If I was writing to a console, this would work fine. And maybe I give another /n to give nice formatting. And now I'm going to say PHP is really cool. I like it. Okay, very horrible blog, I know. Remember, our PHP has to end with a semicolon. Echo does not take any parentheses. So here's our little code. This is going to write out to the HTML document when we run it, and it should write to the screen. So we'll save this. We'll refresh our page, and then we have the text, but notice there's no new lines. There's actually a space, but there's no new lines. And that's because we're writing out to HTML, not the console. So we have to actually literally write out the HTML we want, and when we want, say, to have a new line or a space or formatting. Some of this we can do with CSS, but some of it we can't. So like, instead of new line, I have to use breakpoints. The web page will respect a single space, but any more it will just count it as a single space. So outside of a single space, it will not respect white space unless you use the pre tag. Now I refresh it, and now I get what I expect, where PHP is really cool, is 2 lines beneath the my blog on PHP page. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through this because, again, you should have already learned PHP in the Intro to Web Application class. The if statement. So first of all, variables. Variables do not have to have type, but they have to have a $sign. Something I personally find frustrating with PHP because I find a $sign a very awkward character to type, but I can live with it. So say I have my var equals 10, immediately it will know that my var is an integer and it's going to be 10. I can have my string equals that. Notice I am putting semicolons at the end, so don't forget the semicolons. I want to say PHP 5 stopped that requirement, but I'm not sure. I'll test it out here in a moment. In fact, I'll do it right now. There, so we'll see what happens here. I can't remember. Not that button. Pretty sure. Actually, I'm not sure. We'll find out. So is this going to work or not? No. Can't tell if that worked right. We'll say we'll print my float. By the way, if I need to concatenate a string with something else, I use a dot, not the plus. Another difference. There, so I have 2 lines without a semicolon. Let's see if PHP is going to throw an error. Okay, so it is. So you do need a semicolon. I thought you did. All right. So put the semicolons back in. And now we see it's printing the variable I asked for. See, I feel like something's. Oh yeah, and it's also printing my breakpoint, so it's on a new line. So here are my 3 string variable declarations. I have $signs in front of the variables and giving them value. I need not worry about any other type right now or typecasting right now because simply it's going to be dynamic. When the variable is assigned, the properties of that data type will be given to that variable. This does make PHP a little slower. The if statement. Exactly the same as Java and C++. Compound if statements can have a double and or double pipe for double and for and, double pipe for or. The if body is set by the curly brackets, just like Java and C++. You could also use if, else chains for exclusivity. We'll talk about these in a moment. Another quick and dirty hack, if you have a bunch of HTML you need to write, and you don't want to have to set up, you don't have to write it out in the echo form, which can be annoying, you can disable and re-enable PHP inside the if statement body. And if you do that, then that HTML will print out as normal HTML only if that if statement was true. It's not considered a great coding practice, but can be useful for views. So the if statement, going back to my if statement here. If is going to look a lot like anything you've seen in C or Java or C++. So my var equal 0, or I can do or just like with the pipes, just like I do with Java and C++. My var is greater than, say 5. So here we'll echo my var is either 0 or greater than 5, which it should be because it's set to 10. I can do my else if chain if I want, or I can do my else. So I'll just do my else if chain right now. My var is not equal to 0 and my var is less than 5. So here I'm using and instead of or, and if it's not equal to 0 and it's less than 5, then go ahead and this will be true. Also, it's an else if, so these two cases will be exclusive, which I believe these should be. Actually, no, there will be an else case. And so here we'll say echo my var is not 0 and is less than 5. What is this logic for, you might ask? Really nothing. I'm just doing it as a demonstration for the else if chain. So note that if this is true, this is false, this will be ignored because this is true. This chain is going to be exclusive, and then if any of these are true, else is going to be ignored. If this is true, the rest will be ignored. Just like C++ and Java. So here we'll do echo my, in this situation, my var is equal to 5. So as being it's 10, we should get the first case, so we should see this print up if I've done this correctly. Let me again, since we're outputting to an HTML file, not a console, let me throw in some breakpoints. I will show you later that we can make this process a lot more elegant. This is actually considered very shoddy code by having it inline like this, but for demonstrating PHP on a simple aspect, it's the easiest way to present it. I'll show you more elegant form later. So I save it, I go back to my web page, I refresh it, and I get the first option. My var is either 0 or greater than 5, which is what I expect. I change my var to be 1. Go back to my web page, I refresh it. My var is not 0 and is less than 5. So that's true. And then I'll change it to 5 and I should get the final condition here, the else condition. I save it, go back, refresh, my var is equal to 5. One nice thing about PHP is you don't have to worry about the string compare.
It's just an overwritten double equals for the string. So if $, my string equal bat, then I can echo which makes things very nice, especially in web application, because you'll see that we're going to be dealing with a lot of strings. So I save that, open this up, and I refresh it, and boom, you can see my string is equal to bat.
The switch statement. The format will look, again, very similar to Java and C++. Great for switching between several discrete options. Switches are not useful for testing a range or compound logic. So if I have something like if x is greater than 10, or if x is equal to 10 and y is equal to 3, I cannot use either of those two situations with a switch very easily. I can also use strings in my PHP for switching. This is the switch demo. I'm going to have this already typed out because, well, frankly, I discovered that it was really tedious to sit there and watch me type. Usually in the classroom setting, I type, and that gives the students time to take notes. But since you're watching a movie, please pause the movie and make sure you understand what's going on. I'll probably continue my lectures this way and have the code already typed out. I think it'll make both of our lives a little more easier. Alright, so this is the switch demo. So here I have just a basic HTML document. I have the H1 is a switch test. And then I'm going to have two different switches. One is switching on a number, another is switching on a word. So this is demonstrating that we can switch on a string. So a really kind of silly thing here, but you'll see that it's very similar, if not exactly the same, to C++. In fact, lo and behold, you have the C++ semicolon. So don't forget the semicolon at the end of your switch. It's always a strange one. So here I have a $x equals 3, so I'm just setting up a variable, and I'm going to switch off that variable. So it's pretty much exactly the same as C++, except I've got $signs around my variables. Case 1, case 2, case 3, and then default. Once again, this is good for a single exclusive choice, like a menu system or a discrete set of options that this variable can be. If I'm trying to do something where x is greater or equal to 10, or x is between a certain set of values, then a switch statement is not the correct solution. So here for x is equals 3, it's going to jump down to case 3 and then run, or say echo x is equal to 3 and then break. Notice I have to have the breaks after each case. If I don't, it will compile, but what will happen is when I hit my case, so say x was 1 and there was no break here, then it's just going to keep going to case 2 and then case 3 until it hits a break or until it finishes. Which in certain circumstances that might be what you want. I have seen some algorithms set up where you don't have any breaks in switches and you just go through, and so like the most common case at the top and the most particular case at the bottom, but if you're the most common case, you want to do all the cases. I have seen a couple algorithms do that, but generally speaking, you're going to want to have a break after each case. The same thing here is going to apply for the word. So here I have a string, a word equals apple. I switch on the word. Notice I use double quotes to define my string here. I think I can use single quotes. It might be worth testing out. And then so it's apple, says yummy fruit, and breaks. A car, it says vroom vroom, breaks, and then default. I don't know any other words. A quick word about the default is a common mistake. I may have already said this. A common mistake is the people will use the default as an else. So it's like, say I have 1, 2, 3, or 4. They'll say, well, if it's not 1, it's not 2, it's not 3, then this has to be 4. So they'll put the logic in here as so when x is equal to 4. That's not true, because if this is also a catch-all statement. So basically, if you have an invalid input, then your computer is going to think that the input was 4. So it's good to have a particular case for each individual valid input, and the default be your error case. So if I run this real quick, I already have my server running. I'll refresh it right there. I have switch test, switching on integer x equals 3, and switching on a word, a yummy fruit. Just to prove to you that this is working, I will set this to 1, and I will set this to banana. So here we're going to do, I can't spell banana, why did I say that? Band. Alright, we'll save that. Now we'll go over here and we'll refresh this. And so here we have x equals 1, and here I don't know any other words, so we got the error case on the second case. So that's a real quick introduction to switch. The while loops, again, similar to Java and C++. Loops while something's true. Something to note about while loops, it may never ever loop. It may not ever loop, because if the initial condition is false, it will just skip the entire loop. We don't use these very much in PHP because while loops and web apps don't play very nice together. Usually you don't want those person waiting while you're looping for some condition, and so you just generally do not see while loops used that often in web applications. So the while loop will be the next thing we're going to talk about. Now we have to be very, very, very careful with the while loop on a web page, because the while loop is one of the things that can lead to an infinite loop. Technically, any looping mechanism, which I can't spell infinite apparently, technically any iterative mechanism can be an infinite loop, but the while loop is the biggest prone. And the while loop is going to essentially say while, and then something is true. Obviously this is not the syntax I would use, and then I'm going to have C, C++, Java style with the curly brackets. Now it's important to understand that if this something is false initially, this while loop will bypass it altogether. So when you use a while loop, it's as long as something's true, loop. And if that something's not true when you get there, then just don't worry about it. So there can be a situation of the while loop that you never execute it. A lot of coders do not realize this. Now luckily it's not a big deal, because usually when you run the code you figure out what's happening and you either prime the loop or you change your logic. So here we'll say while my var is not equal to 0. So while it's not equal to 0, we're on a loop. We'll do echo. We'll print a new line, and it'll say, oh, the number is, and then we'll say my var. Now here is the danger of the while loop, because I have to make sure that my condition will be eventually met, and that somehow inside here, unless I'm using a break, which we'll get to later, you can use a break, but unless somehow inside here this condition has to change, this variable has to change, so it will eventually this statement will be eventually false. So eventually I want my var to equal 0. So if I run it like this, I will see I have a problem. So let's see, I'll save it. This will probably crash my computer, but whatever. And then we'll run it. Notice it just freezes. This freezes. I start printing stuff up, but I'm still running, so I have to actually kill the page. So I have this, oh, like I said, this is just not going to be a good day. Okay. So in order to get around this, again, we have to make sure that this variable's changed. And this is why you don't see a lot of while loops in web pages. It's just not usually necessary. And so in this case, we'll just do my var minus equal 1.
and then now this should subtract, so this condition will eventually be false, and then we'll break out of our loop. So I go back to my web page, refresh it. There we go. My number is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it stops. So this is what I would expect to happen, and it's fine, especially when I have like a simple 5 iteration loop like this on a web page, to use a while loop. But often the case, you just won't see a lot of while loops on the web page. They don't really go well with the whole programming paradigm of web applications. Usually you want the user to input data, you submit that data to the server then does something with that and posts data back to the user. So the situation of a while loop is normally not necessary.
The do while, probably the most least used but very useful structure in coding. Again, not super useful in web applications because of the nature, but it's similar to Java and C++. This structure will loop while something's true. However, it will loop at least once. So a lot of times when you write a while loop, you have to set some code before the while loop to initialize it or to prime the while loop. You don't actually have to do that in a do while. The do while will run once before it checks. Again, for the same reason and the risk of infinite loops, you do not want infinite loops with a while loop or the do while loop. These are not used as much in web apps as the for loop, which we'll talk about in a moment.
The do while, let's see if I get the syntax right in the first shot here. Is going to be similar. However, the do while will happen it'll say is greater or equal to 10. I believe it has to have the semicolon like C++. And here we're going to do the same thing we did inside our while loop, except we're going to echo inside do while, and then our number is my var, and then we're going to add one to my var in this situation. Now, the do while is important. A lot of people do not realize this will happen once regardless of what my var is. So the check comes at the end of the loop, and this will be done first. A lot, and I don't know what I would have to think about the percentage, but I would say a substantial majority of the time people use a while loop, they should actually be using a do while. So if you want to loop while something's true, but you want to make sure it loops once, then that's a do while. As long as you only want something to loop while something's true, you can use the while. Let's see if I get my syntax right on the first try to save it. I'm back here. My var plus equal 1. Should be a semicolon there. While, oops, that's because that's false. That's why my logic's wrong. So while my var is less than to 10, then we're going to loop. Sorry, my logic was completely wrong there. You go over here, refresh it, boom. So now inside our do while, our number is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It doesn't actually get to 10 in this situation because we notice that it's checking at the end of the loop, and we are incrementing at 9. Here we print, and then here we would increment and be 10, and this would bail out. If we did the increment first, it would actually print 10, and then it would bail out.
The for loop. Two different styles of loops of the for loop. A conventional for loop, just like Java and C++. I have an iterator that starts at 0, or a counter that starts at 0, goes up to a certain value, or doesn't have to start at 0, it can start wherever it wants, goes to a certain value, and then decrement or increment. I have a for each style for loop which can iterate across a list or an array. These for loops are used a lot more frequently, mainly because of the controlled nature of the for loop. It's going to loop for a set number of times or go through or iterations. And you're going to use this for loops, either one of these for loops, a lot for accessing data in an array. And we'll talk about arrays and why they're so important in PHP.
The next one we have is, of course, the for loop. We have the classic for loop. I'll be proper here. 0. And here we're just going to echo our count. This is the classic Java, C++ for loop that you probably know and love. I'm only going to put a space there, so we should see our numbers printed with a space in between them, and it should count to 10. And we'll put an echo break here so it's a new line. So I'm echoing a new line so it doesn't get caught up with this output. And we should see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 separated by spaces in one nice line here. So I save it, go back here and print, and go refresh, and yes, there I see it. So as far as our loop structures go, pretty much exactly like Java and C++, except that we don't have to worry about the types, of course. Now, one extra thing that's pretty cool about PHP is PHP does allow a for each mechanism. So one thing, we'll make a quick array. I'm going to talk about arrays later, so don't worry about this. This is actually a new school array, and I can do this on one line here. And this is actually going to be what we call an associative array, where my index is going to be indexed by a string or some other value that's not an object but not necessarily a number. So we're not going to have indexes of integers anymore. We're going to have an index of a string, in this case ABC. It's very important because PHP uses this kind of data structure, this associative array or dictionary if you want the Java version of it, and it uses it substantially, so we need to be aware of what's happening here. So here, if I did this, echo B and then A, this should print, I'll do a print line here, or a break. This should print 50. No, 1. Now, let's say I want to go through this array and I want to get the index and the keys. So I can do a for each for loop, for each, and then I'll say my array, which in this case is B, as, and then I'm going to say key associated to value. A little bit weird syntax here. It's not quite as nice as the C++ syntax. I'm going to give myself some space here, but it's still handy. So what's going to happen is going to go through this array, and each iteration I'm going to get 2 variables instead of 1. I'm going to see the key that's associating to the value and the actual value. So here I will do echo, the key is in this case key. Again, where I'm getting this variable, I'm getting this variable from the for loop, and this will be populated for me, and the value is value. So now if I run this, I should see, well, I already saw the 0 to the 9. I should see printing A, which should be 1 here. 1. I don't know why I keep saying 10. And then here, the for each, I should see the key is A, and the value is 1. The key is B, and the value is 50. And the key is C, and the value is 100. I should see that. I save that, open up Firefox, we refresh, and that is exactly what I see. So normally I do not emphasize a for each mechanism very much. It can come back to haunt you algorithmically because it does not tell you what count it's on. A lot of algorithms you'll need to know the count you're on. However, and I say this only for PHP and web applications, the for each is very important and can be very, very useful. So you will want to memorize and understand the for each value here and what's happening. We will revisit this in the next lecture when we talk about arrays. But I just wanted to mention that there is a for each mechanism in PHP, and it actually has a very useful purpose. Whereas a lot of times the for each mechanism is just kind of forgotten about in other languages. Alright, so you practice. We've gone through some examples. I want you to make a PHP script count from a random number between 1 and 10, so that'll be whatever this random number is, that will be the initial value, to another random number between 40 and 50, and then inside that for loop, print the current counter out inside the for loop. Number 2, make a random number between 1 and 100. If it's less than 50, print the random number out and get a new one and loop back. So you're going to loop while the number is less than 50 from a random number between 1 and 100. Number 3, do the same as question 2, but with a do while instead of a while. Thank you for watching Towle Talks. I'll see you next time.